you've done so much. It was kind of like I barely know where to start. You know, like there's so many things that I want to ask about. There's so many things.
By all means, that's great.
Okay. Well, I guess the first thing I want to ask is you seem to carry everything pretty calmly, and I wonder with all the different projects, one after the other, producing, touring with Beck, all the bands you've been in, you don't seem at all tired. I mean,
no, that's not true.
That's not true. Okay.
No, that's not true at all. I'm tired. I mean, it's been a really crazy, particularly 6 or 7 years. Had a daughter.
Yes.
Did a really big world tour with Beck in 2006. Did lots of, started producing around 2007 to some indie bands and stuff like that, and then moved into Nine Inch Nails world.
Right.
And then Nine Inch Nails world carried me through basically the fall of 2009. And then right after that, my wife of 10 years and I separated and eventually divorced. And
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was really insane, mainly because of the timing of it. And then my mom passed away from terminal cancer.
Right.
And it sort of was a confluence of really heavy events, and I didn't stop working. And I think that was part of the catharsis of such a traumatic sort of zone of time, was just to keep going.
Had to keep moving.
Yeah, and so that's what I did. I kept going, and I found my way with the M83 record, really. It was sort of the moment where or rather not the moment, but that was the phase of my life, career-wise, that I found actual catharsis and healing and redemption and everything through my work.
Wow.
I'd never really experienced that before, because generally speaking, I am a pretty calm dude, and I'm generally pretty positive, and I'm not, I work hard and have fun, and I like being with people, and I'm social and that kind of thing, but this was different. This was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I'd never been through hard times, honestly.
You carry it well.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's been a few years now, so that's the thing, and I've had some really surprising successes as a result of that sort of mode and that phase of work, and it's been great. And my personal life is really on the straight and narrow, and it feels great. And my relationships are in good order, and my family's great, and whatever. And so I'm a pretty fortunate guy. And nowadays, it's just like balls to the wall, like strike while it's hot. And I'm still sort of finding my way. Yeah. Like as a producer, for me, like I parlayed all those years of experience, like being in bands and being like even a session musician and whatever, and being like a right-hand man for Beck or the Air guys, or just to some smaller degree, Trent and Nails, and other bands. And I decided one day, sort of on a whim, that would be a good way to kind of grow older gracefully. Yeah. Is to parlay that experience into the other side of the glass and to use my quote-unquote wisdom to try and help other people out. And it's a bit of a cliche, but honestly, like as a producer, all I really care about is people being able to get what they want, and do it in a really direct and clean way where they don't feel like there's too much interference, and they feel like they're whole and they're not compromised, and that kind of stuff, right? So that's what I'm doing, and within that, I have to find my way. I have to find my way of like, what is my process? I got to find my way of like, how do I deal with record companies, or how do I, to what extent do I inflict my own ideas upon the artist or not, and all that stuff. And so it's all a bit new, but because it's new, it's exciting, and I am tired because it's been wall to wall for years, but I'm happy. Yeah. I'm really content and excited about it.
So there's two different directions I kind of want to go from that. I guess you're working on a big record right now, Paramore. Yeah. Are you going to be taking a break coming up from that, or do you have more things lined up already?
I have things lined up already. I have two choices that are happening right after. Well, actually, Paramore ends on October 31st. Okay. Basically, we finish. We have to. It's do or die.
Yeah, must be done.
And then I go with Beck to Australia for a small tour.
So you say you have a couple of things lined up. You might.
Yeah, but nothing's been confirmed yet, so I don't really know what exactly I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I do need a break, and I need to do a break. Like, oftentimes I've found that producers are really successful when they sort of disappear for a month or two, and they catalog sounds and work on their sample library and like do research and see bands and just sort of freshen their palate and their mind and their ears, and then when they start a new project, they seem to be so much riper with great ideas and inspiration, and I would like some of that. That would be really helpful.
A little downtime.
Yeah, but the tour with Beck, I mean, honestly, that's a lot of that right there. That's, going to Soundwave with Beck where there's like 3 or 4 days off in Sydney, and like, come on, I mean, girlfriend's coming with. It's going to be great.
That's going to be awesome.
No complaints.
Yeah, I'm officially jealous. I'm not a musician, but I'm officially jealous.
It's awesome, and I don't take it for granted for a minute, because for me, especially now, it happens sporadically, like the touring thing or the performing thing. It's more sort of an afterthought, and I cram it in, and it's not my primary, way to make a living these days. So when it happens, it's actually a pleasure. It's more like a novelty in a way,
Are you going to continue to be Beck's bass player?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, not just Beck's bass player, but like I have to do live music. I'm 42 and I don't feel very old yet. Mm-hmm. I like the idea that I'm paving the way to have a career that's going to keep me going until I don't want to work anymore.
Right.
But I have to walk the line, and I have to be able to be a performer as well. I'm one of those people that is addicted to the road, and I'm also addicted to performing in front of people, and it's, it can be considered a bit narcissistic, but it is what it is, and I'm really that type of person where I need the connection with people who are experiencing music in an immediate way.
And you get back from the road and you get that itch and you're like, man, I want to get back out there.
Well, there's a good lag. There's always this lag, right? And it seems to be longer and longer as I get older. In other words, if I come back from the road, maybe it's going to be like a few months before I even think about wanting to go on the road again, or even 6 months. But now, but before it was like a few weeks, and I'd be like, oh, where's the tour? Where's the bus? Where's the van? Where's the plane?
Yeah.
Like, let's go. So it's getting slower. A lot of it has to do with having a child.
Yeah.
And seeing her, experience life and wanting to be there for all the changes and whatnot. I mean, that's the common thread for musicians for time immemorial, really. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it is for me too. Yeah. So I want to be there for her, and I want to, have a life with her and my girlfriend, but that only lasts so long, and then I got to do it again.
You got to get out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just when I go to a festival, if I go to like FYF or Coachella or whatever, and I'm hanging out, I just feel jealous.
You're like, I want to be up there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've been doing it since I was a kid, and it's just like a lot of us, it's just in your blood, and you're never going to shake it until literally you're physically incapacitated.
Like you just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, people are different. Like Trent Reznor, for instance, he really wanted to get off the road. He made a very, very conscious decision that when Nails ended, when we finished our last work,
right, he
wanted to reassess his creative life and personal life. Right. And he did. And
in a big way.
Yeah, and I think he's a really happy guy, even more so now because of it. And he's this is a guy who has an Oscar now. And he's got films, and he's creating music that he wants to create in the studio, and there's no pressure from any label, and he's got a wife and 2 kids, and he loves it, and it's great, and that's really admirable, because if he wanted to, he could flog the Nine Inch Nails brand into the grave until it was long since passé, and he just timed it beautifully. Yeah, he just was very savvy about that. I admire him for doing it that way.
I could, just as a fan, I could see it kind of coming. When Ghost happened, I was like,
oh, sure.
I was like, this guy's gonna do a film score, and it's gonna work.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was very self-evident with Ghost. It was like the moment where all that crystallized, and even any casual music fan could sort of see the writing on the wall for him creatively, and then he had a record after that, which is great, and decided to give it one last go and do it all out.
Yeah.
Spent some money on a Baddest Light show and play every city in the world, and you know, it was rad. It was awesome, and I got to be there, and it was spectacular, man.
I mean, it's obviously the right move for him, and you're kind of beginning your pivot too.
Yeah.
Do you ever wish that it hadn't ended? Do you ever,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think a lot of people do. You know, like it was one of those things. It was like kind of punk rock, and that it was totally right that it probably ended right where it did.
Yeah.
But everyone's kind of caught up in the aftershock. You know.
Well said. It's true. I mean, I feel like selfishly desirous of having is back then. You know, particularly maybe not now. I don't think about it as much, but back then I was just sort of like, wow, that was an incredible ride, and I didn't feel like getting off the roller coaster yet.
Yeah.
And especially when you interact with the fans and you realize what it means to them on an emotional level, and you sort of, you exchange that energy with the fans, and you realize that there's this, as you say, an aftershock about it that lasts a bit of time, and you have to reckon with that. You know.
It had been a lot of years for me. And I think the last time I had seen them before the Wave Goodbye shows here was the Coachella performance where he headlined.
Yes.
And it had been a lot of years before that, and each time, those last two times, was like, my God, it sounds amazing. It sounds so crisp. It's like the way you'd want it to be. It's like you remember how it sounded on the album, but then again, it also felt like something more.
Yeah.
And it was like, ooh, it kind of thing gives you tingles as you experience it.
Yeah, he's if there's one word that describes Trent and all his activities, it's excellence. You know, he's just that guy who has his finger on the pulse of every aspect of the career all the way down the chain. He doesn't just go up on stage and do his thing and then bounce. I mean, he's invested in every facet, and man, it just, if there's one thing I took away, and there is more than one thing I took away.
Of course.
If there's one thing I took away, it's like the work ethic is so inspiring. It really is.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to take some of that with me.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, you mentioned earlier when you were speaking about, your production activities, that
Yeah.
you're trying mostly to, help the band find their vision and their sound, help them execute that.
Yeah.
And you kind of hit sewed up to it, so I want to kind of dive in further, is because I guess the word I'm going to use is demystifying, because I've always geeked out on who produced what and who did engineered what tracks.
Me too.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing most people I know, even music fans, don't really care about. They don't think about it. And only hardcore geeks that I've nerding out about that have been interested. So what I'm interested in is, in terms of demystifying it, is for where is the boundary? Like, where is it that, is it in terms of either pushing them to try to do the best they can, or just well, you know what, you gotta help them roll this out the way that they heard it in their head. Is there a line for you in terms of where you stand with that?
It's a bit of a vague and ephemeral thing, but it's emotional impact. And I take music in a very personal way. Like, I'm the guy that I'll cry when I hear Bon Iver's voice, or whatever. I'm just, I take music very, very personally. And music for me came at a time, especially as an Anglophile, particularly where, when Morrissey wrote about such and such, it meant a lot to you, and music had a very deep resonance, and there was no such thing as multiple layers of irony and cynicism with it. It was all hard on sleeve, earnest.
Right.
So this is sort of a long way of answering your question,
Sure.
but it does answer your question, I think. And what it is for me is that I require music that I'm involved in to be pure and truthful. And so, I can't necessarily be involved in records that have veiled agendas. I need it to be clear.
Right.
And when I am working on a song as a producer, and sometimes co-writer, if it starts to be occluded in veils and gauze of devices like studio trickery, or even lyrical wordplay and cleverness, or something where it gets too up its own ass, I want to bail out.
Right.
And I call it out, and I have no interest in further cultivating their art. If there's this divide between pure, truthful, emotional impact and intention, and other things that are sort of a little bit more, just not nefarious, but just kind of like, there's something about it where you don't really know why it's being done. You don't really know why a band or whatever is making that music. Like, there's this sort of inherent snarkiness or over sophistication or something that really I find really irksome.
Yeah.
And it bugs me to the extent where I just want to, like, you know, leave the room if that band is playing or whatever, you know. And wow. It's part of my upbringing as a musician. It's part of the time frame in which I came up, and it's, you could call it just like a generation gap, like just sort of a really, like, I'm 42 and they're 22, and that's, you know, never the twain shall meet. But the thing is for me, I don't think it's as simple as that. I don't think it's that old cliche of the generation gap. I think it's more about, like, I understand modern music pretty well, and therefore I just think it's a matter of shifting the good from the bad, and it's very subjective for me what's good and bad. Yeah. And for me, it has to do with these sort of principles.
If you can feel it that way under the surface, like if it feels like it has that heart and sincerity to it,
it's got to have that heart and sincerity. Otherwise, I just feel like we're making music for entirely selfish reasons or nefarious reasons that are sort of part of a culture that I just don't identify with. You know, so I'm all about sonic adventure and, you know, innovation and all that kind of stuff, but never at the expense of like having the heart stripped away or hidden. So that's the principle. That's the thing that divides it for me.
Yeah.
For when now, if there's a band I really love, like, and they have some great songs, and then some of them are like, you know, going through too many point A, B, C, and D to get to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
So this is now more directly answering your question. It's sort of like I will step in and offer my services as like I can clear cut that shit and hack and burn my way through it, or I can, yeah, or I can, you know, be a co-writer, or we can cut the song out or whatever. But, you know, I need to have honest discourse with the people I'm working with, and I need to be able to say what's on my mind, and therefore, like, you know, when these situations arise, I'll tend to be fairly clear about it without being insensitive, in terms of, like, you know, you guys, seriously, this song, you're beating around the bush. It doesn't belong in this collection of songs because of X.
Right.
And because I honestly just need to be satisfied as a listener. I think that's what good producers really are there for anyway.
Right.
I know I have all kinds of technical savvy, and I can program synths, and I can move the mouse around and edit things in Pro Tools, and just like anybody can. Yeah. I'm just like anybody, you know, and I can play multiple instruments, and that comes in handy. But ultimately, all I'm really doing is making things comfortable for people to express, and also reacting to things as a listener, as just like, is this working? And am I feeling your real intention? And so oftentimes, as a prelude to all that, I'll get into like all this sort of philosophical discourse about, like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And I don't just walk in the room with the band and say, okay, let's start recording your songs. You know, I get into like some pretty serious sort of, you know, tete-a-tete, like, because I want to dissect what the reason is for this collection of songs, and I want to know how each one fits into that puzzle, and I need to hear it from them. I don't want to say it to them. I need to hear it from them, and I need to hear it in their music. Sometimes it's all on the table, and it's plain as day, and it's right there, and you see what it is, and you feel the certain special feeling that song creates, or that collection of songs creates. But sometimes it's not. And sometimes I'm like, we're not there yet. We're not ready to go in the studio. We have to dissect this further, and I really want to take the time to do it. And for the most part, artists are really receptive to that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's the biggest challenge, right? They're used to people trying to thwart their vision instead of helping them realize it.
Yeah, to whatever degree, although I think these days you find a lot of producer types are a lot more sort of less hand in pocket of record company, and a lot less hand in pocket, and a lot more musician and band oriented, because that's generally where cool producers come from these days. Like they're not guys, they're not the guys who roll up to this session in their gold Rolls Royce anymore and with their 2 assistants, and it just doesn't.
Right.
That's long gone. That's been gone for 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
So there's been a shift in terms of what the paradigm is for a producer, but it's been slow. It's sort of the 90s still had that guy.
Yeah.
But the 2000s and beyond, it's really those people have not survived creating their producer sort of MO in the same way. They've had to evolve from there. And the classic ones that are still around, they've had to change, and the new guys are they're a different breed, man. They're just not as interested, or I just don't think they have as much vested interest in their own ego or in sort of acting in a sort of clandestine way with a label. Things are out on the table a lot more. Everyone's got too much to lose.
That's good to hear.
I'm finding it to be more and more clear. And I'm working on an album, like a band and an album right now. A band that's extraordinarily successful and has sold millions of records. And I am surprised and pleased at the level of freedom that we have to be in my studio and do what we want to do as music listeners. And things are just different.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously you're talking about Paramore.
Yeah, as an example.
Yeah, as an example.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what you can say, so obviously you know what level you can and can't talk about it. I'm not trying to push you to do anything that'll, like cat's out of the bag or anything.
Yeah.
But how is it coming so far? How far along is it?
We're almost halfway done.
Yeah.
And what we did is we recorded all the basic elements of the record, like drums and things that required a big room at a different location.
Okay.
And then this is sort of like the common way, you do all that, and then you come into your producer like project room studio, and then you do all that. You fill it in. You fill in the colors, and you've outlined what's on the canvas, and you've drawn it out in charcoal, and now it's time to actually put all the other layers and colors on it, and that's what we're in the middle of, and that involves synths and guitars and vocals and bass and percussion and anything else we can find. And so we're deep in it, and we're like halfway done with all that, and I've built in some time at the end of the process whereby we can come back and listen to what we did.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is we're doing one song at a time. We finish it, and then we make a rough mix of it, and we sort of put it away, and it's like it's done, but it's not done.
Yeah. Like
we're giving ourselves a little bit of space from it, and then we come back and we revisit and we touch it up as we need, and then we sort of. And then my process with this record is to use a mixing engineer who's not me or my engineer, to use someone separate from the process.
Okay.
Because it's a dense record and there's a lot of songs, so I don't want to have to sort of be the only point of view. I want to incorporate someone else's external perspective, and I think that's going to be very helpful.
Nice.
I'm not precious about that. I really need to be able to hand it over to someone and let them look at the picture and say, oh, wow, the density of the track is just too much for this chorus to really sing out.
Yeah.
I'm going to get really happy with the mute button now. And mute this and mute that and replace that and do that, and I'm totally cool with that.
Wow.
I think that's good for a record like this.
Now, I think that since the brothers left the band, there's a lot of thought, worry, concern, interest, excitement. How's the band going to change? Are they going to change? And I'm curious, can you shed any light on that? Like, how is the band evolving?
Yeah, it's very interesting because before I met with Paramore, was not privy to their whole internal dramas. I was unaware of the brothers and the relationship with the rest of the band and how that was all influencing their creative process or even their existence as a band. And as I've gotten to know the 3 existing members of Paramore, Jeremy, Taylor, and Haley, I've learned more about what's up with that and how it informs their writing, because I was involved slightly on some of their writing and sort of as late in the game of the writing.
Right.
And it's been fascinating to see how resilient people are. That's the lesson for me, is their resilience. And with that resilience comes lots of freedom to readdress their aesthetic. And they're not by any means reinventing the wheel with what they are. They are attempting to carry the banner as Paramore in terms of what it means to their fans and what it means to them, and the power that it has, and the sort of intense raw emotion and euphoria of their gigs and all these various things. And they're not, the songs are lending themselves to be part of the landscape of their existing music.
Wow.
Just fine.
Wow.
But they are free. And they're free to the extent that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And that's the perfect time for me to work with a band. And it's exhilarating for me to see, because their eyes are just wide open, and their tastes are broader, and their willingness to try is much more extreme. And
that's exciting.
I say this without even really knowing how it was for them in the past, but
Right.
I can tell that this is different, and it's reflecting in the type of songs and the aesthetic range, and what sort of, not, I don't want to say stylistic, but there are some broad stylistic touches that I would never have expected on a Paramore album. You know? And I was joking with some of their fans, like, that I'm making like the ultimate like hybrid like butt rock dubstep record. And so whatever, their fans are just, you know, their fans are very passionate.
Oh, yeah.
and it's cool, and they like hit me up on Twitter all the time with things like, you know, I hope you're not, you know, taking away the guitars, or what's, you know, we're scared, or like whatever. And you know, who's to blame them? It's just natural. They have passionate fans. They're one of those bands, like, you know, and suffice to say, I'm not gonna ruin their sound or change what they are. I'm just actually providing them an environment to be free within, and they feel great about it. And they use my skills as a song crafter, and as a player, and as a designer of effects for guitar, and like a synth guy, and all that kind of stuff, like to expand their palette and just make it richer.
Nice.
And make things a little bit more 3D. You know,
Yeah.
when you listen to a song, it's going to be like, you're not going to get it the first time necessarily. There's going to be some layers for you to perceive.
Nuance.
There's nuance in there, and I find that really intriguing. This is a band that's growing up.
Yeah.
They don't need to do what they've done before. They've proven themselves. They just have. They're 3 albums deep, and they've proven themselves. They toured endlessly for, you know,
Yeah.
years and years and years now, and they have far more experience than their years would normally dictate, and they're ready to do whatever they want.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the very first interviews I ever did, I started running this music magazine,
Yeah.
actually, with Chris Brenna. from
Oh,
Managed
yeah.
House.
He's a
And-
buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris is awesome.
Yeah,
And-
he is awesome.
And, I mean, like, I felt like we were two old salts just talking about industrial music for, like,
Oh,
an
that's
hour.
rad. Oh, man.
He's awesome. And one of the things he said, and this was 7-8 years ago,
Yeah.
at the time he felt like nobody had a chance to grow and mature like that in the music industry.
No, exactly.
And it sounds like Paramore may be the exception to the rule.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. They're not. The record company is not sitting there drumming their fingers on the table like, you know, hand over the album, hand over the album. But we have a time limit because of like budget constraints and that kind of thing.
Right.
But they have time to really look at the painting from every way that they can look at it, and erase things and restart. And it's rad. And this, you know, it's not. They're not making the Fragile, and they don't have a year to like sit and hold up in a place in New Orleans and like do everything they want.
Yeah.
They don't have that luxury.
Right.
But it is a little bit broad. You know, it's more forgiving than most record recording and release schedules that there are these days, and they have a little bit more money than most bands do. They have the kind of money to record an album that someone on their level normally would.
Yeah.
And with that comes the luxury of time.
Yes.
To some degree. So it's not what it used to be. It's not what it used to be. But and Chris Brenna's right, man. I mean, you know, especially if you're a new band, how do you actually have the time? I mean, you think about the first Nails record, or you think about all kinds of records that you and I came up on. Mm-hmm. You know, they had like. There's this incredible like. Are you a Throbbing Gristle fan of that?
Yeah, and I'm so glad I saw them before Sleazy passed away.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is like another planet.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you know that big box they came out with all the live stuff and all the stuff that has been curated and whatnot. And, you know, the thing about it is that this is a band who were, because of the density, the sheer density of numbers of bands and numbers of labels and the commerce of it and all that, a band like that obviously would never exist now. And it would never exist with the critical resonance that they would have, because they wouldn't have been heard.
Yeah.
And they would have been heard by a select few, and it would have been an elitist thing and whatever.
Yep.
But Throbbing Gristle is a great example. Like, they were like, they were able to have like Hypnosis design record sleeves. So they were able to like, you know, be written up in big music magazines and and be scrutinized for what they were, which is like incredibly deep and brilliant beyond what people like these days would ever see them as. Like they were part of the avant-garde, and the avant-garde was a smaller club.
Yeah.
And with that came time and money to do what they wanted to do. You know, like let's just think about records of that day, and it just doesn't. You know, would Can be able to make like records like they made like now?
Yikes.
You know, would they be able to make Takamaka, would they be able to do all that stuff that they, you know?
Probably not.
You know, Unlimited Edition, like would they, you know, would PIL be able to make Metal Box? You know, so you know, you retroactively look at that and you get very jealous about it, you know, and you read bios of you read about Talk, you read about like, you know, Spirit of Eden, the Laughing Stock, and all those types of recording experiences and bands spending 6 months to a year in the studio. And I made records like that back in the day. I had the privilege of making, you know, Midnight Vultures with Beck, or Sea Change with Beck, or like albums before 10,000 Hertz of Legend with Air, or I made, you know, the albums with Medicine before that, you know, and we had luxuries that you do not have now, and it makes the experience much more, you've always got this clock over your shoulder that you're looking at.
Making sure you're getting it done in time.
And I don't think you had as much of that. And conversely, though, I want to say that there's a silver lining. And the silver lining is, in the time limits and budget limits, you are also forced to innovate, which is neat.
Yeah.
And you're forced to separate the wheat from the chaff of your recording process with a little more definitive, you know, like a little more decisiveness earlier in the process.
Right.
There's benefits to that.
Yeah.
So I think musicians now are starting to reap those benefits.
Yeah.
And there's great records made now for $10,000 that you would have not have maybe heard 30 or 40 years ago. So there's an argument to both sides of it. So I have to give that some credence too.
Yeah. Well, the game has changed, you know, and there's pros and cons to every side.
I have to acknowledge that.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean,
I can be romantic, but I can also be real and realize that it doesn't have to, like, that doesn't mean all the great music was made then and the door's closed and it's over and goodbye. See you later.
Of course. Yeah. Very cool. I wonder, I don't know what you can say again, but is there any song titles for the new Paramore record?
I think that the song titles are all fluid. So with that, I think it's probably best for me not to say.
Because they're not like defined yet.
No, I think there's a lot that are working titles that might not necessarily be the final edition, so I think it's probably best for me to not comment.
No problem at all. How do you know when something's done as a producer? How do you know? Like, is there that feeling like, you know what, we can't mess with this anymore, we should leave this be?
Yeah. I'm discovering more and more of that.
Yeah.
Because as a musician first, I get caught up in the process, and it hampers my ability to say we're finished, right? But as I've been getting into this game, I've been sort of realizing that, like, when I'm on the edge of being a little bit nervous about the song, but feeling that it's exciting, that's when I'm finished.
Wow.
I'm not overbaked with it,
Right.
but I'm a little edgy about letting it go.
Wow.
It's like the bird's going to fly out of the nest, and you want to hold on, and you're terrified a little bit, but you know it's the time. So there's this sort of knife edge that I walk on with that, and I've discovered what it is. And it's hard to articulate into words, but that's the best way I can describe it. It's like that nervousness that something is going to be listened to, you know, critically and emotionally and everything in between. And you have to give it up. And it's a funny thing, but I'm learning to get comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's a wow.
Moment.
Delicate energy, man.
It is, but I have to make sure I'm still edgy about it.
Yeah.
If I'm not edgy about it, I know I've kind of overbaked the song. You know, I've put too much on it.
Yep.
Or I've, you know, finessed the guitar sound in the chorus too much. Or just whatever. It's just like you've gone past the point of no return, and then you realize you're just like, you know, wallowing in some sort of insecurity about your work.
You know, and the reason I ask is because, again, knowing just enough about production to understand how it works, but not really enough to consider myself like an expert in any degree. Like, I think of a few of the records, like, I think of, like, Dark Side of the Moon, or In the Court of the Crimson King, or in just delaying my geek, kind of betraying my own geekery here, the first Mr. Bungle album.
Oh, Bungle, sure.
Yeah, when I think of, like, some of the albums that are, like, these are some of the best produced things I've heard, I listen to it, and there's so much going on in this, and there's so much things that they're trying to channel. And even Dark Side, which is a much more meditative record, it's like much calmer. It's like, how in the world did they know? Like, yeah, that's what that needed to be. That was when we were done, because they were trying so many different things, and they're experimenting. And you know, Bungle was probably the more chaotic example of the bunch, and they had samples and horn players and everything kind of crisscrossing and genres changing, and it's like, and that boggles my brain. So it's really interesting to hear you say that. You know.
I am mystified by it, even as much as I can say that I know how to do it for my own productions.
Yeah.
But I can't necessarily say the same thing for any other record I listen to. I have the same head-scratching mystery about it that you do, and it's just elusive, man. I don't know when they decided that, you know, Laughing Stock was finished, or Kid A was finished, or whatever.
Blue Monday, or
how did they know when Blue Monday was done? How did they know? How did Joy Division and Martin Hannett know when Unknown Pleasures and Closer were finished? And those are some of the most mysterious records to me of all.
Right.
And I don't get it. And their techniques are like lost ancient arts or something.
Yeah.
And as much as someone like me might want to ape those techniques, I'll never get it.
Wow.
I'll never get it.
Crazy.
I can pretend, and I can have fun trying.
Is that a victim to the Pro Tools era? Is there something about like the old school way that?
It's a confluence of a bunch of stuff, man. It's like the Pro Tools era mixed with the music band culture and the music producer relationship.
Yeah.
The way record companies work. But yeah, studio techniques and the technological sort of critical mass that we're at now has really changed the game. And like if you for instance listen to like the first two Joy Division records, the only two studio Joy Division records,
right,
you will be enthralled with the simplicity, but the ambience in which the instruments are recorded are so special and unique that you could tell that Martin Hannett spent a lot of time crafting just that. Like it's like honestly like the reverb on the snare, like I can sit there and geek out on those records endlessly. And for me, something as elemental and simple as the reverb on the snare becomes like a huge emotional pivot point. Like if it wasn't there, it wouldn't be the same.
Right.
And like it's a big deal. And you know, it's lost arts, man. And I only hope that along the way I'm going to pick up my own arts that are, you know, that are particular and special. I mean, you know, for instance, like the M83 album, Hurry Up We're Dreaming, like I crafted that album from the ground up with Anthony Gonzalez, and we wrote all those songs together, and we knew exactly what we were doing, and we you know, with bumps in the road and challenges and tribulations, we got there, and I'm happy with it. But for me, because I was in it, there's nothing mysterious about it. But for music listeners and people who have approached me about it, it's like some tabula rasa for them. It's like some weird, you know, Dead Sea Scrolls or something. Like something they'll never fully fathom. And I'm a little perplexed by that, but on the other hand, I don't necessarily feel like I want to give away all the secrets of that record, because there are things about that are, you know, parts of my trade and part of my process. But I do think it's like, really, it's not really that weird or complex or whatever. I don't know.
I wouldn't call it weird, but like
No,
it's
not
lush.
really.
Lush is the word I would use to describe it.
Yeah, sure, and that's how I would describe it too. And for me, it's pretty simple. But for certain people who've approached it with me, they find that really mysterious, and that's fine. And maybe that's part of the joy of, you know, that thing. Sometimes part of that should stay mysterious, and we shouldn't have all the access to the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, it's funny because it's great. This is interesting because of all the things I wanted to ask you, I have very little to ask about that album because, I don't know, I guess in some respect, for me, it's kind of all there. You know, it's like, it's such a gorgeous, lush record. And the one thing I think I will ask you about it is you kind of hinted at earlier about the earnest, the honesty, the heart, and the sleep. And I feel like, I'm probably going for a very easy assumption here, but I feel like when you and Anthony were making that record, that probably you both were, like, I don't know, living in that kind of a zone. Like that's what I got from every song on the album. There was an earnestness and like a bright-eyed, like, I don't want to say optimism, but there was a like wide open like pursuit kind of thing happening, you know. And I think as I was doing research last night, that I was reading that Anthony spent a little time in Joshua Tree, and then I found myself thinking, well, that's not surprising at all because Joshua Tree's like that. It's like being on
like
Mars.
That. It is like that. It makes you think of things that you wouldn't think of in the city.
Yeah.
The answer to your question is that that's exactly what happened. And the record started as a solution to pain and trauma, and ended up being a celebration of life. I don't really know how else to put it.
Yeah.
But that's what it is, and it's primarily about, if you could, we do liken it to a concept album, it's primarily about regaining the freedom, innocence, and immortality of youth, and mainly the immortality of youth. The fact that when you were young, you felt like moments where you could fly, or you could do things that were limitless, and you felt the inspiration from like the smell of the trees you were walking under as you walked to school in 6th grade,
Right.
or the incredible buzz and electricity and magic of like a first kiss, or like a first dance, or like all these really profound moments of youth that are far less interesting when you're older. And that's what that album's about. It's about nothing more than that.
Yep.
And there's a song on the album called Steve McQueen, which, if there ever was the album that sort of embodies everything in one, it's that song, lyrically and musically.
Wow.
It's sort of realization of all those things. You know, the album is also about pain. It's also about getting through pain, and betrayal, and a few other things that are on the darker side. But largely, it all has to do with the search for innocence and zeal and, like, you know, that sort of feeling of being immortal, and that's what it's about. And honestly, like, the only reason I can call that album a success is because we actually achieved what we wanted. And the albums to the degree that they don't are that much less successful in your mind for you.
Right.
But I just think that was a moment in time, and it resonated with people. Last year when that album came out, it just was the right thing. Who knew? We were terrified before it came out. We were like, we handed it over to Mute, and we said, this is the double album, and it has to be released this way. And we were queried on it a number of times, and we were adamant.
Wow.
We were adamant. It had to be this. Not just out of principle, but because of what the songs meant.
And a couple of friends of mine are mutual journalists, and they were in a different publication, and they were a couple of the first people on the other side of the glass to hear some of the tracks from the album.
Right.
And it was several months before I even heard it, and they came to me and they were like, holy crap, it's beautiful.
Wow.
That were the first words I heard, and I was like, okay, well, I trust them implicitly, this is going to be good. You know, and it was, just like you say, for whatever reason, it connected like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
That was the goal. And Anthony and I sit around and we don't say, hey, good job, man, maybe we'll make $1 out of this after all. We say, wow, you know, we actually gave people something that's actually real, that they can, that's the reason for music in the first place. And there's lots of different reasons for different types of music and the different emotional spectrums that they contain, but we did our thing and it was resonant. And hey,
You guys going to do it again?
that's a good question. Anthony and I have become really close personal friends, and it's been really nice to just be personal friends since the album came out. I've also done stints as a musician with M83,
Right.
done cameos and festivals and shows and whatnot, and I've also helped, like, put their show together, like, technically.
Yeah.
Because I do that on the side. Like, sometimes I'll be like a music director for people.
Yeah.
And so there's been that sort of like biz stuff going on, but on the other hand, we don't talk about the creation of music. We geek out about keyboards or gear or pedals or guitars or whatever, but mostly we've become like personal friends because we just went through a lot together. And
Right.
when you go through a lot together, it's sort of like, you know, going through a plane crash or going through anything that's significant, good or bad, you get sort of this lifelong bond that's never going to go away.
Right.
And that's what we have, and I treasure that actually more than most anything, except maybe for the album itself. And
Yeah.
the fact that we have this sort of sibling bond as a result of a record, I really couldn't ask for more.
Right.
It's rad. I mean, it's really a joy to have that. We don't talk about another record. M83 has always gone in different directions. There's always been a different producer. There's been different guest vocalists. There's been different, you know, he's never been one to invest on his laurels. So I would not be surprised one bit if he decided to just make an album without me. It wouldn't make sense,
Right.
frankly.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Crazy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I guess I want to go on one little philosophical tangent, and then I'll snap back.
Please. Yeah.
But, you know, you spoke so much about recapturing that beauty, that essence, those kind of immortality, as you put it. And I wonder, because like you say, so many of those things do get lost in growing up and being an adult, and
Yeah.
you get so off bills, laundry, groceries, whatever,
Right.
fuck, you know, like
Yeah, exactly.
crap comes up. And I wonder, I mean, you know, granted, we're music fans, aficionados,
Yeah.
players, maybe we're not qualified to tackle this, but I have to ask, since you went down that corridor, like, why do you think we lose sight of that so much as we grow up, as we mature? Like, why do you think we lose control of that, or forget to pay attention to it?
Because we are, I'll venture to say, we're victims of lifestyle, and we're victims of pursuit. And I think those things together have benefits that are fun. You know, sure, I want an iPhone 5, or sure, I want a nicer house to live in, or
Right.
whatever. But it encumbers us, and it, you know, it kind of you can kind of get zen about it, and you can sort of look like, wow, are people with less, are they actually less happy? And the answer is profoundly no. And we've seen it time and time again in documentaries when we read about indigenous people, learn about indigenous peoples, or when you travel, you start to realize it more and more. And especially like if I've been on tour and I've seen things. I've been in the south of Spain and been invited to somebody's, family gathering, and it was, food, wine, and song for 6 hours all night. And
right.
You know what? They were going to do it again the next night. That was not a special occasion.
Right.
And I've seen things like that, and like many of us have, that show us that like the difference between our youth and our current life is the game of pursuit and happiness in all its forms, and the monetization of our happiness, and putting money values on happiness in terms of the acquisition of stuff.
Yeah.
And all that sort of thing is it's sure detrimental to feeling who you really are. I'm quite guilty of it, and I'm trying to be self-aware of it, and I'm trying to grow through it and not be a material person. But I find myself as material as anybody.
It's hard not to in this country.
It is hard not to, especially in this country. And every time I go to Europe or Asia or South America, I feel awakenings of different things, and they help me place different values on things in my life.
Right.
And it's cool. And also the thing that helps you put different values in things in life is like going through trauma and going through loss. And when you do that, you start to, evaluate different things differently. And then you start to think about your spiritual life, and you start to think about your friends and family as being the only things that really matter. And if this was all gone, would it really matter?
Yeah.
The fact is, it wouldn't matter at all. It would mean, I could do anything. I could do whatever I wanted and still make music.
Right.
And that's pretty great. So that M83 album touches on some of that stuff, and it's kind of interesting. But I don't pretend to be a philosopher. But
no.
I guess just for me, I'm saying things that anyone would say. I think that if you're self-aware and you read and you watch and you see where we are, and you see the pain that people carry around with them, and you understand the divide between their happiness and their materialism, and you especially if you travel, it helps you keep things in check.
Well put, man. Well put. Whew. Well, I'm going to go in a divergent direction from there. Yeah, man.
Thanks for asking.
No, hey, had to.
Sure.
Sometimes the door opens and you're like, I've got to walk through it.
I understand.
Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your time with Tegan and Sara. I know you wrapped up with them, and I know that the album is kind of chopped up. You produced a portion, Greg Kirsten produced a portion, and Mike Alessandro produced a portion. And I'm curious how your portion came out.
It's funny. I was the afterthought. I was the let's get that guy that produced that cool record. And that's the way I'm going to be for a while to people, and that's okay because I'm self-aware enough to understand how the game works and realize that I take a lot of meetings now just because I made an album that was of a certain moment, and that's going to go away someday, and hopefully my work will outlast that.
Of course.
Point is, with Tegan and Sara, I had a meeting with Tegan, and her and I met, and she's a passionate music fan and music creator, and a really delightful, funny, intelligent person, and I was immediately attracted to how brilliant her and her sister are at just their perspective on life and the things that are meaningful to them, and how that arrives in their music. And I was just enthralled with them, and I've always been a fan of Tegan and Sara. And they approached me out of one of those, meetings that had to do with they wanted to explore some other avenues for this record, and they wanted to do a few songs with someone different. And I was the guy that was on their menu, and we had a nice meeting. It was really simple.
Yeah.
And when we started doing the songs, we just had a really tiny window to do them. Like, we had 2 weeks to sort of finish everything, basically.
Wow.
And it was 3 songs. And and they came out, like when I listen to them now, I'm really happy because they came out exactly how I wanted, and even with a time limit, we had a really tidy amount of time, and it came out great. And I wonder though how they're going to fit in the landscape of an album, because they were done in a vacuum without me understanding the rest of the songs, and likewise for Mike and for Greg.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that. And so it's all in the sequencing and the mastering. And they've been through the process of really trying to do it and redo it and redo it to where they're really satisfied with making it contiguous.
Yeah.
And I am fascinated by that, because I have never produced part of an album before.
Yeah.
It's the first time for me. I've only produced maybe 10, 12 records in my career, including the one I'm doing now. But that was the first time I'd done just a fraction of a record, like just a group of songs. So I'm mystified by it, and I can't wait to see how it comes out. The thing is though, that's cool is that, like Greg Kirsten and I, and to some degree Mike, to a degree, we're all friends, right?
Yeah.
And Greg and I have toured together, and we've made music together. We've recorded together. You know, I play bass in his band. His band, The Bird and the Bee,
right.
Kennard George, and I'm literally like, that happens every now and then, and I'm the guy they call, like, dude, you want to play bass? I'm like, yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. And it's like a fun thing. And so we have a relationship, and also we have a creative parody. Like, there's things in his music lexicon that are really like just like mine, his history and whatnot. And so I'd like to think that there's these parallel lines running side by side, and that in the end they might coexist together really nicely. But I wouldn't know, because deliberately Tegan and Sara kept everyone's music sort of like in separate piles.
But they have some notion of how this is going to
They do,
together.
and they directed
Nice.
the producers during the process to work on it in ways that was like harmonious with other stuff. Like, they would do it without even me being aware of it. Like, in terms of certain sounds that I would go for, and they would say, let's not do that too much.
Huh.
I'd be like, oh, interesting.
Okay. Now, is it like the Paramore songs? Are they, title-wise, are they fluid right now, or do you know what those songs are called, those three?
I don't.
Oh.
I wouldn't know.
Wow.
They had working titles that may or may not be the final, so yeah, I wouldn't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Now, you, speaking of collaborators, I want to ask you about Digital Noise Academy, and it seems like, if I have my read of the project correctly, it's kind of something you and your friends are doing for fun. And
Totally.
yeah, and I wonder, you obviously did a Kickstarter, which was successful for it.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is it the kind of thing where, in addition to everything else you have going on, are you going to start continually recording and touring with that band as well, or is that just kind of, we wanted to get an album time in there?
No, there won't be touring. We've romanticized about shows, because we've all been performing musicians forever. Jordan from Blink of the Star, Sharky from Creeper Lagoon, Charlotte Martin, Ken Andrews' wife, who's also like a solo performer and like more like a piano singer-songwriter person, and then Ken Andrews himself from Failure and On Near the Rabbit and all that.
That's really cool.
And he and I are the people that sort of put it together. The other person who's peripherally involved is Brad Lehner, who's from my old band Medicine. Who's like, you know, someone who he and I have had a creative life together for now almost, oh my God, it's been like 20 years now. And we always will. And it is purely fun, and it did only start as fun. And the Kickstarter was a way for us to actually incentivize ourselves to finish it. And the way to finish it is to actually like have enough money to mix it, and have enough money to actually print some copies and some T-shirts, and just like get them to the people who bought them.
Yeah.
And simple. And it was great, because now I have to put a hole in my schedule to actually get in there. The thing, and do it, and finish the last, I think we need about, we needed some touch-ups on some songs, and we need maybe about 4 or 5 more new pieces of music. The thing that's rad about it is, for me, is that it's just fun being with those people. We just get in a room, and it's just so free and easy, and cooled out, and, you know, free of vested interest, and it's fun, man. And we just are all friends, and that's the reason why we do it. And there's some songs that people are going to love, and I'm really stoked on it. And I am also a person who is a big Ken Andrews fan. He and I have known each other for 20, 25 years, something like that. And with that, I want to see him making music, and he's done a lot of like more mixing and producing over the years, and hasn't been much of a like performer as much, and so now I'm more stoked to like see him get more into that mode.
Right.
And so this is a good way for him to do that with friends and get back to that.
Right. We talked a bit about working with Beck, and you'll always continue to work with him. And
Yeah.
You kind of hinted back in March that you guys were in the studio working on some stuff. And Beck obviously has a songwriter project coming out, which is a whole, ball of wax.
Yep.
And I'm curious, either March, what you were doing in March, or otherwise, you guys have something, new album?
So Beck, you can divide his albums up. It's in the most crude way, you know. You got that stuff. You got like Midnight Vultures, Odelay, The Information of Wedo, and then you've got like a bit more introspective songwriter music.
Yeah,
that's
the
still,
sea change type
sea
stuff.
change, Mutations, One Foot in the Grave to an extent, and parts of other records, and then you've got other stuff like where we've recorded stuff that's very deliberately country, and recorded stuff that like for compilations or certain gigs we've done where we've just done like a country thing or like we've done that a few times, and so there's, and then we've recorded a bunch of stuff in Nashville and that was very influenced by that, and so I don't know, man, it's just sort of he's always got those sides and he's got to satisfy them, and he has to figure out which one he wants to finish.
Wow.
I don't know how to put it. It's tough, and I've done a lot of recording with him over the past year in the aim of trying to like fine tune that stuff and get it done, but that's just from bass department.
Right.
I'm not his producer.
Right.
So I've always been his bass player, and I always will be his bass player. And I always like to, dabble in other instruments with him. I've always played synths and guitars and other shit with him and on records. But it's exciting to me because he's hidden away for a while and done just producing records, and he's produced some like really cool records.
Yeah.
And he's proven his mettle in that area, and now I think applying that acumen to his own stuff is really neat, and the sophistication of what I've heard is really rad. But I just don't know when anything's going to come out. I don't know when anything's going to get finished. I don't know if we're going to tour anymore past Australia.
Wow.
It's all completely up in the air, and he's really just kind of relaxed, and he feels like he can just do whatever whenever.
That must be, after all he's accomplished, that must be awesome.
It's awesome,
Yeah.
and it's admirable, and I like it when people are like that. It makes the art flow in this really easy, natural way, and it doesn't have, any restrictions. And so he's gonna just figure it out. And I think right now, I haven't seen him since we did Outside Lands, but since then, I know he's been like hard at it, and I haven't done anything with him since. So I don't know what's going on. And then, but there's also sort of like still press and stuff going on with like the Songreader project, for instance.
Of course.
And so that's still like sort of the new release, if you will.
Right.
And people ask me a lot of questions about the Songreader project, but it's sort of out of my area of influence because I was not involved at all. The only person that was involved in the band with that record is Roger Manning.
Yeah.
And Roger helped Beck put that together. And I wasn't involved at all, and I've just been someone who's sort of like, oh wow, just like everyone else, and been totally amazed by it, and I just think it's cool. I get a lot of really hot and cold response about it. Like, people are super polarized about the thing, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
I love that people are polarized about it.
Yeah. It's like his little, what is it, I'm going to say the wrong name, John Cage moment.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's just, and like, wait, you didn't put music on a CD? I can't interface with this.
Can't interface. But you know what? It's already happening. People are interfacing like crazy with it. Mm-hmm. And no one will ever hear the Beck renderings of those songs.
He's never going to do them. That's amazing.
Why should he?
Yeah. One of the things that, I've been interviewing artists for a long time, and what's wonderful talking to someone like you is that I think there's a lack of pretension, and there's some artists that are just like, holy crap, swollen heads and egos behind things. And one of the things that I always compare it to the Melvins. The Melvins are a band who, know exactly where they stand
Oh,
with
yeah.
their art and their music.
Yeah.
And whether people like it or hate it, they're not worried about it. It's fine. And
That's a great template.
And I mean, and it's like they obviously understand that when we're doing a thing that
Yeah.
not everyone might love,
Yeah.
but let them hate it if they're going to hate it.
Yeah.
You know what we need to accomplish. And there seems to be, well, my point is, most bands tend to be, I don't want to generalize that much, but a lot of bands tend to not be as in tune with that spirit of like, we are now asking people to listen to something, and what does that mean? What does that mean? How will they interface with it? How will they engage with it? And I think it's exciting when anybody can stand up and say, okay, let's see what happens. Because the moment you create something, it has a life of its own. It stops being under your control, which is...
It's over.
It's over, yeah. It's out there, and whoa, watch what happens. It's like you said, the bird will fly.
Yeah, the bird will fly, and man, damn the torpedoes. Who cares ultimately? Unless you're gonna like lose your shirt and like have to be destitute because you can't do the art anymore because everyone hates it.
Yeah.
But other than that,
See what happens.
I love it when there's bands like the Melvins. There's other artists I keep thinking of that are like that, that just do whatever they want on a sort of more like like in an older generational way, I guess. I mean, Elvis Costello kind of does that, doesn't he?
Yeah, a little bit. Lou Reed.
Yeah, Lou. You know, for better or for worse.
For better, for worse, maybe worse, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, but there's also those bands. I think of it also like, in a way, like Built to Spill is that way for me. Like they just are reliable, and they put out good records. And I loved their last record, and I just think that they just enjoy being together and making records and writing songs.
There is definitely a lack of pretensions to the way they handle everything. It's just, here we go.
Yeah, and they can be obstinate, and they can be a little bit like snooty or whatever, but who cares? You know, it's rad. Like, for instance, for my generation, I wish that Pavement just kept going forever and became the Grateful Dead of indie rock. I wish.
Yes.
And most of my peers wish that.
Of course.
But such was not to be, you know? And you got Wowie Zowie and a couple other little things, and then that was it. And that was the end, and it's all good.
Yeah.
Because you always have that stuff, but you wish that they carried on. You know, people like me also wish the Smiths carried on forever. Everybody does. Or even something a bit more on the, like, specialized, like the Cocteau Twins. Like, you always felt like the Cocteau Twins would make records only for the Cocteau Twins, and they didn't give a damn about anyone else. And it was cool. And you know, and then there's like punk bands that are like that too, and or more just straight up indie like feeling bands. Like you mentioned Melvins, that's a good example. Bands that have 20 records and they just don't care. And
like Wire.
Yeah, Wire keeps making records, and their last couple of records have actually been like had incredible brilliance on them. Like what was that record that came out 2 years ago or 3 years ago? It's amazing to me.
I know. I can't remember the name.
And they're one of my favorite bands, and I'm always going to pick it up. But I'm also going to be surprised when they don't pleasantly surprised when they don't reinvent the wheel or try and rehash, Pink Flag or Chairs Missing or whatever. And
30 years later, you're like, you failed.
Yeah, they're actually they're kind of vital, and there's something really visceral about listening to a Wire record even now in their 50s.
And I gotta get on just itty bitty rant, and I'll get to my last question. I saw them at Coachella 2 years ago, and there was like 20 people in the crowd. I
missed it.
So pissed.
It was really that spare, huh?
It was like, maybe a hip thing was happening at another stage. I don't know. But like, I was like, how could people be missing this? Is like what I found myself.
Were they in the tent?
Yeah, they were
Mojave?
in the small one. Yeah, the Mojave, the Gabi tent. They were in the small one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's disappointing.
It really, right?
Yeah.
I won't go down that corridor.
Yeah.
I'll stop myself from going that way. But last question, and then I'll let you guys. I know there are people on the other side of this door ready to work. I want to ask you about the Serge Gainsbourg tribute show, because that was like, I don't know, for me, like the high point of geekery. Like, I was like,
wow,
my favorite singer is Mike Patton. And,
oh, yeah.
And between that and Beck, and then you were kind of the musical director, and then all these amazing people, like, doing that show, and then the SWAT at the end, that was like good God, how is this happening? So my question for you is, because it was
I so appreciate that, because I just feel, honestly, a little bit like that whole experience was totally under the radar and a little bit swept under the rug.
It shouldn't have been. It was incredible.
And I'm glad it was recorded and filmed, because someday it's going to get released. But I really appreciate that you appreciated the event, because it was really special for me.
So that's my question. Was it daunting taking on a canon of material that, what the hell, amazing? No?
Yes.
Oh, what?
I'm shaking my head. Yes. I'm saying
yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes, no. The thing is, man, is that, like, yeah, of course I'm a Gainsbourg fan, and of course, like, you know, culturally and musically, those records mean a hell of a lot to me, and I was conflicted about even being involved in the first place, because I was afraid to be sort of like the guy who's just sort of a fan who's aping it, and, you know, playing it, you know, half as good as the original and that kind of thing. But then I realized that it was a fleeting moment, and if we didn't do it really well, then it was going to be a parody. And so a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into the runway leading up to it, and picking the artists and some last minute stuff and some last minute bailouts and some there was some heavy shit that went down with that gig.
No kidding.
Yeah, man, it was intense. It got dark, and then the sun shone on it, and it got bright. And you know, man, I'll tell you what, the brightest spot for me for that whole thing was Patton, because he came in there with more energy and more determination and, you know, a bent for excellence than anybody did, and he just owned it and did it his own way.
Yeah.
And I was really appreciative of that. You know, like, honestly, like, it was the most hair-raising 3 hours of my life as a musician.
Wow.
Of my entire career. And I was caught between keeping the band afloat, being the music director, playing my own parts right, and looking at a giant mountain of sheet music.
Oh my God.
And just appreciating the moment and actually listening to the artists who were singing with us. So it was a very involved experience that was, like, I felt like I needed to, like, crawl away in a hole and not talk to him for a week afterwards. It was so draining and so intense and so emotional.
Wow.
But look, it was so cool working with everybody. Like, you know, dude from Grizzly Bear.
Yeah, that dressed.
Ed was so great, and Beth. No, not Beth. Wait, homegirl from.
Who goes to the Saber-Tooth Tiger?
No, who was also amazing.
Oh, I know who you mean. The girl from Beach House.
Beach House girl.
Victoria Liv.
Victoria. Sorry, I forget her name. She's great. And Victoria and Ed, and like everyone's nervous. And Zola, who also was the other highlight for me of the whole thing. Like, everyone was so nervous, and also had to work through their own insecurities and preciousness about being together as artists, doing something as a unit.
Yeah.
And the esprit de corps that developed out of it was amazing, and the relationships that spawned from it are also amazing.
Yeah.
And now there's interpersonal relationships that are really amazing that came from that experience with Beck and Zola, with Ed and Victoria, with like all kinds of stuff.
Patton and Vanier.
With Patton and Vanier, with the actor gentleman who did
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
He saved the entire thing.
He was incredible.
He saved the entire thing, and his demeanor and work ethic behind the scenes leading up to it was, I mean, honestly, that guy gets a trophy. It was so amazing what he pulled out, because he was last minute.
Really?
Nobody knew that, but he was last minute, man.
No shit.
And it was incredible. And Vanier was a very challenging person to work for.
Wow.
Very challenging.
Particular after all these years?
Sure. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough.
It was hard, and it was hard on everybody. It was hard on myself. It was hard on, the people at the bowl who put the thing on. It was hard on everybody. And he was uncompromising, and that was good. But it was a real challenge, And at the end of the night, we're all, drinking champagne and everything's cool. But man, the runway up to it wasn't there. And I feel really good because I feel as the bass player, which in my estimation is aside from the strings, the most pivotal instrument of Gainsbourg's music.
God, that bass line in His Swat and Melody Nelson, that's the record right there.
I know, it's the record, and it's crazy. And to be the guy who is taking the Herbie Flowers parts and like rendering them anew is a real honor. And I felt that in the end, I was like, you know what, man, you did a good job. Pat on the back. That was a tall order, and you did it, and you should be stoked. And everybody had a good time, and no one lost a limb, no one had an eye poked out. Everyone was okay,
I'll let you know this, and this will be the closing thought. That was actually the hardest I've ever fought to cover a show in my entire life.
Really?
Yes, that was the most. I put more effort into covering that show, and I know everyone who works at the Bowl. You know
Joanna and everything really well?
Well, the publicists and everything.
Oh, yeah,
my girlfriend's really close with the publicists and everything like that, and literally, I put more effort into that than I did covering the Wave Goodbye shows for Nine Inch Nails.
Wow.
Yeah, so you nailed it.
Wow.
Great job.
Thanks. Gosh, that's satisfying.
Justin Meldal-Johnsen, mxdwn interview.
Thanks.
Pleasure, brother.
Pleasure's mine.
Seriously.